Good evening, and welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth.
And I'm Maya Clarity. Tonight, we have a packed investigative broadcast. 5 stories from around the globe that, when you connect the dots, paint a troubling picture about the systems of power operating in our world right now.
We're covering a landmark inquiry into communal violence in England, institutional abuse of power in Hong Kong, political cronyism in American diplomacy, ancient evidence of mass violence against the most vulnerable, and the ongoing battle over the origins of the deadliest pandemic in a century.
Each of these stories, on its own, demands your attention. But together, they reveal a pattern we keep seeing at Truth Report: those in power manipulating narratives, exploiting the vulnerable, and dodging accountability at every turn. Let's get into it.
We start tonight in Leicester, England, where a major independent inquiry has just released its findings on the communal violence that rocked the city. According to reporting from Middle East Eye, the inquiry has concluded that Hindu nationalist ideas and disinformation played a direct role in fueling the unrest.
For those who need context, Leicester experienced serious communal disorder between Hindu and Muslim communities. What started around tensions following a cricket match between India and Pakistan escalated into weeks of street violence, intimidation, and community breakdown in a city long celebrated for its multiculturalism.
And here's what makes this inquiry's findings so significant. This wasn't just spontaneous communal tension boiling over. The inquiry found that Hindutva ideology, that's the political ideology of Hindu nationalism promoted by groups aligned with India's ruling BJP, was actively imported into a British city. Outside actors exploited local tensions for a transnational ideological project.
Let's be very precise about what that means. Disinformation was deliberately circulated to inflame the situation. False claims about attacks on Hindu women, fabricated stories about temple desecrations, narratives designed to provoke fear and rage were amplified through social media networks. And the inquiry found these weren't organic. They were part of a coordinated pattern.
The disinformation playbook here is textbook. You take a real incident, in this case tensions around a cricket match, you layer on fabricated atrocity stories, you amplify them through WhatsApp groups and social media, and suddenly you've turned a local dispute into a communal war. We've seen this exact pattern in India, in Myanmar, in Sri Lanka. Now it's operating on British streets.
And what's particularly damning is the role of groups linked to the Hindutva movement. Organizations that operate as cultural or community groups but function as ideological pipelines. The inquiry found these networks were active in Leicester, organizing marches, spreading inflammatory content, and framing the violence as a defensive response to Muslim aggression, when the evidence tells a far more complicated story.
The response from authorities has been inadequate, to put it generously. Leicester police were slow to recognize the ideological dimension of the violence. They treated it as a straightforward public order issue, two communities clashing, when the reality was that external ideological actors were pouring gasoline on the fire. By the time they understood what was happening, serious damage had been done.
This raises a critical question about how Western democracies handle the export of foreign nationalist movements onto their soil. The UK government has been reluctant to confront the influence of Hindutva networks, partly because of trade and diplomatic relationships with India, and partly because there's a genuine fear of being accused of targeting Hindu communities. But this inquiry makes clear that failing to address it has real consequences for real people.
And let's name who was harmed here. Muslim families in Leicester were terrorized. Their homes were targeted, their mosques were threatened, and they were subjected to organized intimidation. But Hindu residents who wanted no part of this extremism were also victimized, their community hijacked by an ideology many of them reject. Disinformation doesn't just hurt the people it targets. It poisons entire communities.
The deeper lesson from Leicester is that in our interconnected world, no community is insulated from transnational extremism. Whether it's white supremacist networks, Islamist radicalization, or Hindu nationalist mobilization, the mechanics are the same. Exploit grievances, manufacture outrage, and weaponize identity. The inquiry's findings should be a wake-up call, but the question is whether anyone in power is actually listening.
We turn now to Hong Kong, where a senior officer with the Auxiliary Medical Service has been suspended after being arrested and charged with indecent assault against a female colleague. According to the South China Morning Post, Chief Staff Officer Alex Wong Ying-kung was taken into custody this month and charged with 1 count of indecent assault. The case is scheduled to be mentioned at Kowloon City Court.
Let's unpack what we know. Wong held the rank of Chief Staff Officer, which is a senior leadership position within the Auxiliary Medical Service. The victim was reportedly a senior female colleague within the same organization. This isn't a case of a stranger assault. This is an allegation of a powerful man within a uniformed, hierarchical service targeting someone he worked alongside.
The Auxiliary Medical Service is a disciplined service under Hong Kong's Security Bureau. Its members provide emergency medical support during disasters, major incidents, and public events. These are people who are supposed to serve and protect the public. When someone at the very top of that chain of command is charged with assaulting a colleague, it strikes at the heart of institutional trust.
And the dynamics of power here cannot be overstated. In any hierarchical, uniformed organization, the barriers to reporting abuse by a superior are enormous. The victim in this case was herself a senior officer, and even she was reportedly assaulted. Imagine the vulnerability of junior members in these organizations. If a chief staff officer feels entitled to allegedly assault a senior colleague, what message does that send about the culture from the top down?
We should note that Wong has been charged but not convicted, and he's entitled to the presumption of innocence before the courts. That said, the fact that the Auxiliary Medical Service moved to suspend him indicates the institution is taking the allegation seriously. The investigation reportedly took some time, which raises questions about how quickly these matters are addressed internally before reaching law enforcement.
This story fits into a broader pattern we track at Truth Report. Institutional power being used as a shield for personal misconduct. Whether it's military organizations, police forces, medical services, or corporate hierarchies, the structure that's supposed to create order and accountability too often creates the conditions for abuse. The uniform and the rank become armor.
Hong Kong's legal system will now have to adjudicate this case, and will be following it closely. But regardless of the outcome, it should prompt a serious review of safeguarding policies within the Auxiliary Medical Service and similar uniformed organizations. How are complaints handled internally? What protections exist for those who come forward? Is there independent oversight? These are the questions that matter beyond the individual case.
And for the women in these organizations, this case is a reminder that rank does not equal safety. Seniority does not protect you. Every institution needs robust, independent channels for reporting abuse that bypass the chain of command entirely. Anything less is a system designed to protect perpetrators.
Now to a story that would be almost comical if it didn't reveal something deeply troubling about American diplomacy. Nick Adams, the right-wing influencer and self-described alpha male, has been dropped as President Trump's nominee for ambassador to Malaysia. Reporting from the South China Morning Post confirms that Adams himself acknowledged the change in an email to the Sydney Morning Herald.
And his response tells you everything you need to know about the state of American political culture right now. When confronted about being dropped, Adams told the journalist, and I quote, "Brilliant detective work, Mick. I've been promoted from the role of ambassador." He then claimed more details on his supposed promotion would come soon. This is the kind of spin that would be impressive if it weren't so transparently absurd.
Let's talk about who Nick Adams is and why this nomination was controversial from the start. Adams is an Australian-born, American-naturalized conservative commentator who built his brand on performative masculinity and loyalty to Donald Trump. His qualifications for diplomacy in Southeast Asia were, to put it diplomatically, not immediately apparent. He had no foreign policy experience, no diplomatic training, and no particular expertise in Malaysian or ASEAN affairs.
Malaysia is the United States' 21st largest trading partner. It's a strategically vital nation in the South China Sea corridor. It's a Muslim-majority democracy navigating complex relationships with China, the United States, and its ASEAN neighbors. The semiconductor supply chain runs through Malaysia. This is not a posting you hand to a social media personality as a reward for political loyalty.
And that's exactly what this nomination was. Ambassador postings have long been used as patronage rewards in American politics. Both parties do it, but the Trump administration has pushed this to new extremes. When you nominate someone whose primary qualification is posting inflammatory content on social media to represent your country in a complex geopolitical environment, you're telling the world that diplomacy is a joke to you.
The fact that Adams was dropped suggests even this administration recognized the nomination was untenable. But here's what concerns me. Adams claims he's been promoted to something else. If that's true, it means the system isn't self-correcting. It's just reshuffling. A person manifestly unqualified for one role of public trust is simply being moved to another.
Consider what this looks like from Malaysia's perspective. The United States nominated someone with no relevant experience or expertise to be its representative to your country, then dropped him amid controversy. That's not just an insult to Malaysia. It signals that the US doesn't take the relationship seriously. In a region where China is aggressively courting partners with infrastructure investment and diplomatic attention, America is sending the message that Southeast Asia is an afterthought.
The broader pattern here is the degradation of institutional competence through political patronage. When ambassadorships, agency heads, and key government positions are filled based on loyalty rather than capability, the machinery of governance degrades. Every unqualified appointment makes the system a little less functional, a little less capable of serving the public interest. It's a slow-motion dismantling of the state's capacity to govern.
And we should note, Adams' inflammatory rhetoric wasn't just irrelevant to diplomacy. It was actively counterproductive. His history of provocative statements about masculinity, immigration, and culture wars would have made him a liability in a Muslim-majority nation where American soft power is already contested. The nomination itself did damage before it was even withdrawn.
The question we should all be asking is, who else has been nominated for critical positions based on the same criteria? Nick Adams became a story because the absurdity was visible. But across the federal government, how many positions are being filled with people whose primary qualification is political loyalty? That's the structural threat that one dropped nomination doesn't fix.
Now we shift to a story that takes us back thousands of years but speaks directly to the present. According to research published in Nature, archaeologists have uncovered an Iron Age mass grave that reveals unprecedented levels of violence directed specifically against women and children who were moving through Europe.
This is a significant archaeological finding. Researchers have documented evidence of mass violence targeting the most vulnerable populations, women and children who appear to have been migrants or travelers moving through the European continent during the Iron Age. The scale and specificity of the violence is what researchers are calling unprecedented.
Let's be clear about what the evidence shows. These weren't casualties of a battle between armies. The skeletal remains show patterns of violence deliberately directed at non-combatants. Women and children. People who posed no military threat. People who were targeted precisely because of their vulnerability. The archaeological evidence, the trauma patterns on the bones, tells a story of deliberate, organized brutality.
The research, published in one of the world's most prestigious scientific journals, used modern forensic techniques to analyze these ancient remains. Isotopic analysis of the bones revealed that many of the victims were not local to the area where they were killed. They were people on the move, migrants traveling through a region where they had no community protection, no local networks, no one to defend them.
And this is where the ancient past speaks to the present with devastating clarity. The pattern identified by these researchers, vulnerable people in transit being subjected to organized violence, is not a relic of the Iron Age. It is happening right now, today, on virtually every continent. Migrants crossing the Mediterranean, refugees at borders, displaced populations in conflict zones. The targeting of the vulnerable in motion is one of humanity's oldest and most persistent atrocities.
What makes this research particularly important is that it challenges a sanitized narrative about ancient violence. There's a tendency to imagine pre-modern conflict as warfare between men, armies clashing on battlefields. This mass grave tells a different story. It tells us that the deliberate targeting of women and children, what we would today call atrocities or war crimes, has deep roots in human behavior. Understanding that history is essential to confronting it in the present.
The researchers emphasize that these victims were people in transition, moving through regions during a period of significant population movement across Europe. They were caught between territories, between communities, in the spaces where state protection, such as it existed, did not reach. That liminal vulnerability, being between places and belonging to no one's jurisdiction, made them targets.
Consider the parallels. Today, the most dangerous moments for migrants and refugees are the transit points. The open sea, the desert crossings, the border zones. These are the spaces where organized violence, whether from smugglers, militias, or even state actors, flourishes precisely because accountability is absent. The Iron Age mass grave is a mirror held up to our present. The technology changes. The geography shifts. But the fundamental dynamic, that the powerful prey on the displaced, endures.
This research should also make us think critically about how we memorialize and study violence. These women and children have been anonymous for millennia. Modern science is finally giving them back their stories, their origins, the circumstances of their deaths. Every unnamed victim in a contemporary mass grave deserves the same determination to uncover the truth. Science and journalism share that obligation.
And we should note that this finding comes at a time when political rhetoric about migration across Europe and globally has become increasingly dehumanizing. When we strip migrants of their humanity in our language and our policies, we create the conditions for violence against them. The Iron Age mass grave is a warning carved in bone.
Our final story tonight concerns what may be the most consequential scientific and political question of our time. Nature has published what it describes as the world's first comprehensive investigation into the origins of COVID-19, summarizing what researchers now know and, crucially, what remains unknown about how the deadliest pandemic in a century began.
This is a story we've been covering since the beginning, and it remains one of the most politically charged scientific questions in history. The investigation examines both leading hypotheses, natural spillover from an animal host, likely through the wildlife trade, and the possibility of a laboratory-related incident at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And the honest answer, even now, is that definitive proof for either hypothesis remains elusive.
Let's go through what the evidence does tell us. The natural spillover hypothesis is supported by the pattern of early cases clustering around the Huanan seafood market in Wuhan, where live wild animals susceptible to SARS-CoV-2 were sold. Genomic evidence suggests at least 2 separate spillover events from animals to humans, which would be difficult to explain under a lab leak scenario. The broader coronavirus family has a long history of jumping from animals to humans through exactly this kind of wildlife trade.
On the other side, the lab leak hypothesis draws on the proximity of the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which was conducting research on bat coronaviruses, and on legitimate questions about laboratory safety practices. Proponents point to the unusual features of SARS-CoV-2's spike protein and the furin cleavage site as potentially suggestive of engineering, though many virologists argue these features can arise through natural evolution. The absence of a confirmed intermediate animal host continues to fuel speculation.
What this comprehensive investigation makes clear is that the political weaponization of this question has severely damaged our ability to answer it. China's lack of transparency, its refusal to share raw data, and its obstruction of international investigators has made a definitive conclusion nearly impossible. But equally, the politicization of the lab leak hypothesis in Western countries, where it became a proxy for broader anti-China sentiment, contaminated what should have been a purely scientific inquiry.
The stakes here go far beyond assigning blame for one pandemic. How COVID-19 started determines how we prevent the next one. If it was natural spillover, the priority is regulating the wildlife trade, improving surveillance at the human-animal interface, and monitoring wet markets. If it was a lab incident, the priority is strengthening biosafety protocols, increasing oversight of gain-of-function research, and creating international inspection regimes. Getting the answer wrong means preparing for the wrong threat.
And here's what troubles me most about this story. The comprehensive investigation that Nature is reporting on is happening 6 years after the pandemic began. 6 years. During which millions died, economies collapsed, and societies were torn apart. The fact that we still cannot definitively answer the most basic question, how did this start, represents a catastrophic failure of international governance, scientific transparency, and political leadership.
The investigation also highlights how much critical evidence has likely been lost. Early samples were destroyed, databases were taken offline, witnesses have gone silent. Whether that destruction was deliberate obstruction or standard procedure depends on who you ask, but the practical result is the same. The trail has gone cold in crucial places, and that serves the interests of anyone who doesn't want the truth to emerge.
We should emphasize what the scientific consensus currently looks like, because it's more nuanced than either political camp wants to admit. Most virologists and epidemiologists consider natural spillover the more likely explanation, based on the weight of evidence and historical precedent. But a significant minority of credible scientists maintain that a lab-related incident cannot be ruled out. This isn't a settled question, and anyone who tells you it is, in either direction, is selling you something.
The lesson for the public is that uncertainty is not the same as ignorance. We know a great deal about this virus, its behavior, its evolution, its vulnerabilities. What we lack is the origin story, and that gap exists not because of scientific limitations but because of political choices. Choices by governments to suppress information, choices by politicians to exploit the question, and choices by institutions to prioritize their reputations over transparency.
And that brings us to the thread that connects every story we've covered tonight. Maya, when you look across these 5 investigations, what's the common denominator?
It's the gap between truth and power, Alex. In every single story, the truth exists, it's knowable, it's documented. But powerful actors, whether they're governments, institutions, ideological movements, or political patrons, are working to distort, suppress, or exploit it for their own ends.
In Leicester, Hindu nationalist networks imported disinformation to turn neighbors against each other. In Hong Kong, institutional hierarchy allegedly shielded abuse. In Washington, political loyalty trumped competence in diplomacy. In the Iron Age mass grave, we see that the powerful have been preying on the displaced for millennia. And with COVID's origins, geopolitical rivalries have prevented humanity from answering a question that could save millions of future lives.
The pattern is consistent. Power protects itself. It uses disinformation in Leicester, institutional rank in Hong Kong, political patronage in Washington, and state secrecy in the COVID origins debate. The tools change, but the objective is always the same: maintain control of the narrative, avoid accountability, and protect the interests of those at the top.
And notice who bears the cost in every single story. In Leicester, it's ordinary families, Hindu and Muslim, whose community was torn apart. In Hong Kong, it's the women in uniformed services who have to navigate systems that don't protect them. In the Malaysia ambassador debacle, it's the people of both nations who deserve competent diplomacy. In the mass grave, it's the women and children whose names we'll never know. In the pandemic, it's the millions who died and the billions who suffered.
The cost of institutional failure is always paid by the most vulnerable. That's not a coincidence. That's the system working as designed, at least from the perspective of those who hold power within it. The question is whether we accept that design or whether we demand something better.
And that's why journalism like this matters. Not because any one broadcast changes the world, but because the documentation of these patterns is itself an act of resistance against the forces that rely on ignorance and amnesia. Every story we report, every connection we draw, every question we ask makes it a little harder for power to operate in the dark.
To our audience, we say this: be skeptical of every narrative that serves power. Whether it comes from a government, a corporation, an ideological movement, or a social media algorithm, ask who benefits. Follow the evidence, not the outrage. And support independent journalism, because the forces we've described tonight have unlimited resources to shape what you believe. The only counter is rigorous, documented truth.
Share tonight's report. Talk about these stories with your families, your colleagues, your communities. The Leicester inquiry findings deserve attention far beyond the UK. The COVID origins investigation demands continued public pressure for transparency. And the next time someone tells you a political appointment doesn't matter, remind them that diplomacy has consequences for millions of people.
From all of us at Truth Report, thank you for watching, thank you for thinking critically, and thank you for demanding better from the institutions that govern our world.
I'm Alex Truth.
And I'm Maya Clarity. Stay informed. Stay vigilant. And we'll see you next time on Truth